This could change everything. We need to act now.
Oh, I agree, but we have to be cautious. Let's review the data again.
The glass vial slipped from Chioma Okafor's fingers, shattering against the laboratory floor just as she saw it, the number that didn't belong. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the research data displayed on Dr. Kang Minho's computer screen, the screen he'd left open when he'd stepped out to take a phone call. The compound concentration read 0.003 milligrams per milliliter, but every previous trial report, every safety protocol, every regulatory document had listed it as 0.03. Someone had moved a decimal point, and if those clinical trials launched tomorrow with the wrong dosage, people would die. Chioma's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, then stopped. She was a research assistant on a temporary visa, not even supposed to be in the senior researcher's office. Dr. Kang was the celebrated biochemist, the man whose pharmaceutical innovations had saved thousands of lives, whose company was about to launch the most anticipated treatment for autoimmune diseases in a decade. Who would believe her over him? But as she heard his footsteps returning down the corridor, she knew she had only seconds to decide whether to stay silent or destroy her entire future in Seoul. 6 hours earlier, Chioma had been standing in the Human Resources office of Genesis Biotech, trying not to cry as the director explained that her contract would not be renewed. The words had felt like stones dropping into her stomach, each one heavier than the last. Her work visa was tied to this position, and without it, she had 30 days to leave South Korea or find new sponsorship. After 3 years of building a life in Seoul, of learning the language and culture, of finally feeling like she belonged somewhere, she was being sent away. The director, a thin woman with wire-rimmed glasses, had at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Your work has been excellent, Miss Okafor, truly exceptional. But the new department head prefers researchers from Korean universities, and since your position is grant-funded." She had trailed off, the implication clear. Chioma's Nigerian university credentials, her British master's degree, her published papers on enzyme kinetics, none of it mattered as much as where she'd gotten her undergraduate degree. Chioma had walked back to her tiny laboratory workstation in a daze, past the gleaming equipment and sterile white walls that had been her second home for 3 years. She'd come to South Korea on a research fellowship, drawn by Genesis Biotech's groundbreaking work in autoimmune treatment, and by Dr. Kang Minho's reputation as a scientist who valued innovation over politics. She'd thought merit would be enough. She'd been wrong. Her phone buzzed with a message from her younger sister back in Lagos. "Mom's asking when you're sending money for brother's school fees. I told her you'd handle it." Chioma closed her eyes and leaned against the lab bench. She had 840,000 won in her account, barely enough for next month's rent in her shared Gashiwan room, let alone her family's expectations. Her mother had bragged to everyone in their neighborhood about her daughter, the scientist in Seoul, working for a famous pharmaceutical company. How could she explain that she'd failed, that she was coming home? The laboratory door had opened and Dr. Kang's research coordinator, a Korean-American woman named Stephanie Park, had entered with an expression that somehow managed to be sympathetic and businesslike at once. "Chioma, I heard about your contract. I'm sorry." She had paused, then lowered her voice. "But I might have something. It's unusual, but Dr. Kang needs someone for a special project tonight. High-level corporate security, confidential research review, one-time payment of 5 million won." Chioma's heart had leaped. 5 million won would give her time to find new sponsorship, maybe even a month of breathing room. What kind of project? Dr. Kang is finalizing a major partnership tonight. The company wants an independent researcher to verify the clinical trial data before the contracts are signed. Someone with expertise in biochemistry and enzyme reactions. Someone not connected to either company who can spot problems. Stephanie had studied her carefully. Someone with nothing to lose by telling the truth. The words had stung because they were accurate. Chioma had nothing left to lose. That was how she'd found herself in the executive conference room of the Millennium Seoul Hilton at 8 o'clock that evening, wearing her only professional dress and carrying a briefcase filled with reference materials she'd pulled from the Genesis Biotech archives. The room was dominated by a massive table surrounded by men in expensive suits, and at the head sat Dr. Kang Minho himself. Chioma had seen him before, of course, at company presentations, in the hallways, once in the cafeteria where he'd actually smiled at her when she'd held the door open for him. But seeing him here, in his element, was different. He was 41 years old, though he looked younger, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything. His presence was magnetic in a way that had nothing to do with his expensive suit or his reputation. It was the way he listened when others spoke, the precision of his questions, the sense that his mind was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. The men around him were executives from Meridian Pharmaceuticals, an American company that wanted to partner with Dr. Kang's research division for global distribution of his new autoimmune treatment. The lead executive, a man named Robert Chen, was speaking too quickly, his enthusiasm almost aggressive. The trials are ready to launch. FDA approval is practically guaranteed. This partnership will revolutionize autoimmune treatment globally. Dr. Kang had nodded, but Chioma noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed soundlessly against the table. He was uncertain about something, though everyone else in the room seemed confident. A server had appeared to refill water glasses, and Chioma had used the moment to review the documents spread before her: clinical trial protocols, safety assessments, compound specifications. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. "Miss Okafor," Dr. Kang's voice had cut through her concentration. "You've reviewed the enzyme stability data. Any concerns?" His English was flawless, with just a hint of a Korean accent that somehow made him even more compelling. Chioma had looked up to find every eye in the room on her. "The stability profile matches your published research. The compound remains active at body temperature for the required duration." "And the dosage specifications?" Robert Chen had asked, his tone carrying a hint of challenge. "They appear consistent across all documents," she'd replied carefully, though something had nagged at her. The numbers were consistent, yes, but were they correct? She'd worked with similar compounds during her master's research, and something about the concentration levels felt off. The meeting had continued for another hour. Discussions of manufacturing timelines and market projections and regulatory pathways. But Chioma's attention kept returning to those concentration numbers, the feeling growing stronger that she was missing something crucial. When Dr. Kang had finally called for a break and stepped out to take a phone call, she'd noticed he'd left his laptop open, the master research file displayed on the screen. She shouldn't have looked. It violated every protocol, every professional boundary. But her feet had carried her around the table, her eyes scanning the data with the systematic precision that had earned her top marks in biochemistry. And that was when she'd seen it. The original compound concentration of 0.03 mg/ml, exactly 10 times higher than what was listed in tonight's trial documents. The glass vial shattering had been an accident, her nerveless fingers losing their grip. But as Dr. Kang had rushed back into the room, as the other executives had risen from their seats in alarm, Chioma had found herself speaking words that would change everything. "The dosage is wrong." The room had frozen. Robert Chen's face had gone from confusion to anger in seconds. "Excuse me, who do you think you are to?" "The clinical trial protocol lists the compound concentration as 0.003 milligrams per milliliter." Chioma's voice had been steady despite her racing heart. But Dr. Kang's original research, the published studies, every safety assessment, they all used 0.03. Someone moved the decimal point. Dr. Kang had gone very still, his eyes moving from Chioma to his laptop screen to Robert Chen's face, which had drained of color. "Show me," he'd said quietly, and the authority in his voice had been absolute. With shaking hands, Chioma had pulled up the original research files on his laptop, then the trial protocols from tonight's documents. Side by side, the discrepancy was undeniable. The dosage in the trial protocol was 1/10 of what it should be, which meant the treatment would be ineffective. Patients would receive a drug that did nothing while their autoimmune conditions progressed untreated. "This is absurd," Robert Chen had blustered. "Obviously it's a typo in the research files, not the trial protocol." "No," Dr. Kang's voice had cut through the room like a blade. "Miss Okafor is correct. The original research used 0.03 mg/ml. I reviewed those numbers myself hundreds of times." His gaze had fixed on Robert Chen with an intensity that made the American executive flinch. Someone changed the trial protocol, deliberately. The implications had hung in the air like poison gas. A deliberately ineffective drug would fail clinical trials, destroying Dr. Kang's reputation and Genesis Biotech's credibility. Meridian Pharmaceuticals would then be positioned to acquire the company's assets at a fraction of their value, gaining access to all of Dr. Kang's research at bargain prices. "Everyone out," Dr. Kang had said, his voice carrying a cold fury that made even the most senior executives move toward the door without argument. "Except Miss Okafor." As the room had emptied, Chioma had felt the full weight of what she'd just done. She'd exposed corporate fraud at the highest level, made powerful enemies, and destroyed any chance of ever working in pharmaceutical research again. But looking at Dr. Kang's face, seeing the mix of gratitude and dawning realization there, she knew she'd made the right choice. "You just saved me from destroying my own life's work," he'd said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "If those trials had launched with the wrong dosage..." He'd trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "People would have suffered while taking an ineffective drug," Chioma had finished quietly, "and you would have been blamed for the failure." Dr. Kang had studied her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "How did you catch this when my own research team didn't?" "Because I wasn't reading it as someone who already knew the numbers," she'd replied. "I was reading it as someone trying to understand them, and because enzyme kinetics is my specialty, I know what those concentrations should look like for this type of compound." "Your specialty," he'd repeated softly. "The temporary research assistant there refusing to renew." It wasn't a question. Somehow he knew her situation, had known who she was before tonight. Chioma had felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was informed today that my contract won't be extended. Apparently my credentials aren't from the right universities." Something had flickered across Dr. Kang's face, anger though she sensed it wasn't directed at her. "And yet you're here anyway, risking what little you have left to tell me the truth." He'd stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the suddenly intimate space. "Why?" "Because the truth matters more than my career," she'd said simply. "And because people's lives are more important than my visa status." The silence that had followed was charged with something Chioma couldn't name. Dr. Kang had looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, really seeing her, and the intensity of his gaze had made her breath catch. "Chioma Okafor," he'd said, testing her name on his tongue. "I need you to stay in Seoul tonight. My security team will take you somewhere safe until this is resolved." "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is." His tone had brooked no argument. "Robert Chen just lost a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme because of you. He's not going to simply accept that and walk away. He'll want to silence anyone who can expose what he tried to do." Dr. Kang had pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "My team will protect you until I can handle this properly." "Handle it how?" Chioma had asked, though part of her had been afraid of the answer. "By making sure Robert Chen and anyone else involved in this fraud spends the next decade in prison." The cold certainty in his voice had made her grateful she was on his side. "But first, I need to make sure you're safe, because I don't abandon people who risk everything to protect me." as his security team had arrived to escort her to a hotel, as Dr. Kang had given her a business card with his personal number and told her to call if she needed anything. Chioma had realized her life had just changed in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. She'd started the evening as an unwanted temporary employee with no future in Seoul. Now she was under the protection of one of South Korea's most brilliant scientists, and she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. 4 days later, Chioma sat in a luxury hotel suite in Gangnam, staring at the message that had appeared on her phone an hour ago. Dinner tonight, 7 p.m. The address below. We need to talk. Kang Minho. Since the night at the Hilton, she'd been under constant security protection. 2 guards stationed outside her hotel room, another following at a discreet distance whenever she ventured out. The news about Meridian Pharmaceutical's fraud attempt had broken yesterday. Federal investigators in both Korea and the U.S. Robert Chen arrested, multiple executives implicated. Chioma's name hadn't appeared in any articles, but she knew her intervention had triggered everything. The address Dr. Kang had sent led to a private restaurant in Cheongdam-dong, the kind of place where celebrities and businessmen went to avoid publicity. Chioma had worn her interview suit, the only professional outfit she owned, and tried to ignore the way her hands trembled as she entered. Dr. Kang was waiting in a private dining room overlooking the Han River, and he stood as she entered with a courtesy that felt both formal and intimate. He was wearing a dark shirt with no tie, more casual than she'd ever seen him, and somehow it made him more approachable and more attractive at once. "Thank you for coming," he said in Korean, then switched to English when he saw her hesitate. "I wasn't sure you would." "Your invitation was compelling," Chioma replied, settling into the chair across from him. "Though I'm not sure why I'm here." "Because I have a proposition for you." He poured tea for both of them, the ritual creating a moment of comfortable silence. "I've spent the last 4 days thinking about what happened at that meeting, about the fact that you saw in minutes what my entire research team missed for weeks." Chioma's stomach tightened. "I was just doing what any good scientist would do." "No," Dr. Kang's voice was gentle but firm. "You were doing what any brilliant scientist with integrity would do. There's a difference." He leaned forward slightly. "I've also spent time reviewing your academic record, your research on enzyme kinetics, your thesis on protein stability. It's remarkable work." "Not remarkable enough to keep my position at Genesis," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "That wasn't about your work. That was about politics and prejudice, neither of which have any place in science." His eyes held hers with unsettling intensity. "Which is why I want to offer you a position in my personal research division, not as a temporary assistant, but as a senior researcher reporting directly to me." The words hung between them like something too large to fully process. "I don't understand. Your personal division." "I'm leaving Genesis Biotech," Dr. Kang said calmly. "After what happened with Meridian, I've realized that I've compromised too much, trusted the wrong people, let corporate politics interfere with scientific integrity. I'm starting my own research institute, and I want you to be part of the founding team." Chioma felt her heart racing. "Why me? You could recruit anyone, professors, experienced researchers." "Because you have something more valuable than experience," he interrupted. "You have the courage to tell the truth even when it costs you everything. You have the scientific brilliance to spot errors that others miss, and you have the integrity to put human lives above your own career." He paused. "That's exactly what I need in a research partner." "Partner," the word came out as barely a whisper. "Senior researcher initially, but yes, eventually a partner in every sense. I want to build something different, Chioma. A research institute where scientific truth matters more than politics, where brilliant minds are valued regardless of where they studied or what passport they hold." His voice carried a weight of conviction that made her believe him. "And I want you there from the beginning." A server appeared with their food, but Chioma barely noticed what was placed in front of her. Her mind was spinning with possibilities and fears. What kind of research would we be doing? Continuing the autoimmune work, but expanding into other areas. Enzyme replacement therapies, protein engineering, personalized medicine. Dr. Kang's enthusiasm was evident now, his usual controlled demeanor giving way to genuine excitement. With proper funding and the right team, we could develop treatments that actually help people instead of enriching pharmaceutical companies. And the funding? Chioma asked, trying to ground herself in practical concerns. Starting a research institute requires massive capital. I have investors who believe in what I'm building, and after exposing Meridian's fraud, several major foundations have approached me about funding independent research. He smiled slightly. Apparently, there's value in having a reputation for integrity. They talked through dinner about research possibilities, about the structure of the new institute, about the team he was building. But underneath the professional discussion, Chioma felt something else growing, an awareness of how Dr. Kang looked at her when she explained her ideas, the way his face lit up when she challenged his assumptions, the electricity that seemed to crackle in the air between them. There's one more thing, Dr. Kang said as dessert arrived. The position comes with a salary of 80 million won per year, plus research funding and visa sponsorship. Chioma nearly dropped her teacup. 80 million won was more than triple what she'd been earning at Genesis. It was more than she'd ever imagined making as a researcher. That's incredibly generous. It's what you're worth, he said simply, and it's a fraction of what you saved me by catching that fraud. He hesitated, then added more softly, I want you to stay in Seoul, Chioma, not just because you're brilliant, though you are, not just because you're an exceptional researcher, though you're that too. I want you to stay because. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with words in a way she'd never seen from him. Because, she prompted, her heart hammering. Because you're the first person in years who has made me remember why I became a scientist. The first person who has challenged me, surprised me, made me question my assumptions. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. The first person who has made me feel less alone. The admission hung between them, charged with implications that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Chioma felt something shifting inside her, her carefully maintained professional boundaries crumbling under the weight of his honesty. I need time to think, she said finally, though her heart already knew the answer. Of course. Dr. Kang reached across the table and briefly touched her hand, the contact sending an unexpected jolt through her entire body. But Chioma, don't think too long. The world is full of people who will try to convince you that your integrity is a weakness. I'm offering you a place where it's your greatest strength. As they left the restaurant, Chioma realized that Dr. Kang's offer represented more than just a job. It was a chance to step into a life she'd never imagined, to work at the highest levels of scientific research, to maybe, terrifyingly, thrillingly, explore whatever this connection was between them. The question was whether she was brave enough to take the leap. Her answer came not in words but in action. 2 days later, she found herself standing in the lobby of the newly leased research facility in Gangnam at 8 in the morning, wearing a new blazer that had cost her most of her security payment, but made her feel like she belonged in this new world. The building was modern and filled with state-of-the-art equipment, a testament to Dr. Kang's vision and resources. His assistant, a efficient woman named Ms. Song, led her through the facility to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Dr. Kang is in meetings until 10, Ms. Song explained in Korean, but he wanted you to start immediately. These are the research proposals he'd like you to review. The stack of documents was intimidating. Grant applications, research protocols, equipment specifications. But as Chioma settled behind the desk and opened the first file, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of work that matched her capabilities. She lost herself in the science, her mind moving through enzyme kinetics and protein structures with a fluidity that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with biochemistry in the first place. She was deep in analysis of a proposed protein synthesis method when Dr. Kang appeared in her doorway. Finding anything interesting? Chioma looked up, startled by how much time had passed. The morning sun had given way to afternoon light, and her desk was covered with notes and calculations. Actually, yes. This proposal for enzyme replacement therapy, the delivery method they're suggesting won't work. The enzyme will degrade before it reaches the target cells. Dr. Kang entered the office and closed the door behind him, his presence immediately making the spacious room feel more intimate. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked side by side, Chioma explaining her analysis, while Dr. Kang asked questions that demonstrated why he was one of the leading biochemists in Asia. Their collaboration was seamless, her experimental insights complementing his theoretical framework in ways that felt natural and exciting. "You're right," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "The delivery system needs to be completely redesigned, which means we need to reject this proposal and develop our own approach." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from merely handsome to genuinely captivating. "This is exactly why I needed you here." The praise sent warmth through Chioma's chest, but it was accompanied by an awareness of how close they were sitting, how his attention made her feel both professionally validated and personally seen in ways that were dangerous to her peace of mind. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm that was both productive and increasingly charged with unspoken tension. Chioma would arrive early to work on research protocols. Dr. Kang would stop by her office for discussions that ranged from enzyme kinetics to philosophy to their vastly different upbringing. Together, they began building something remarkable, not just a research institute, but a partnership that felt effortless. But it was the moments between the work that created the real tension. The way Dr. Kang's hand would brush hers when reaching for a beaker, the way his eyes would linger on her face when she was explaining a complex reaction, the way conversations about science would drift into more personal territory. "You never told me why you chose biochemistry," he said one evening as they worked late in the laboratory. The building was empty except for them, Seoul's lights creating a glittering backdrop beyond the windows. "Same reason most scientists choose their field, I suppose," Chioma replied, carefully pipetting a solution. "I wanted to understand how things work at the most fundamental level, to solve puzzles that could help people." She looked up from her work. "What about you?" "My mother died from an autoimmune disease when I was 15, Dr. Kang said quietly. "The treatments available then were primitive, ineffective. I watched her suffer for 3 years, and I couldn't do anything to help her." His jaw tightened with old pain. "I became a scientist because I never wanted another child to watch their mother die from something we should be able to cure." The raw honesty in his voice made Chioma's chest ache. "I'm sorry, that must have been devastating." "It taught me that scientific research isn't abstract, it's personal. Every treatment we develop, every protein we synthesize, it's for someone's mother, someone's child, someone's future." He looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You understand that. I could see it in the way you reacted when you caught that dosage error. You weren't thinking about career consequences. You were thinking about the patients who would suffer." "Of course I was," Chioma said softly. "Isn't that why we do this work?" "It should be, but most researchers I know have lost that perspective. They're focused on publications, grants, prestige. You still have it." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You still have the purity of purpose that drew you to science in the first place." The weight of his gaze made it clear he was talking about more than just her work ethic, and Chioma felt her carefully maintained boundaries beginning to dissolve. "Dr. Kang." "Minho," he interrupted gently. "When it's just us, please call me Minho." "Minho," she repeated, the intimacy of using his given name sending a thrill through her. "This is complicated." "I know. There are a dozen reasons why this is a bad idea. You're my supervisor. We work together. The cultural differences, the professional implications. I know all of that, he said, his voice rough. I've listed those reasons to myself every night for weeks, trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is something I can control or ignore. His hand came up to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. But it's not working. What's not working? Chioma whispered, though she knew the answer. Pretending that you're just my colleague. Pretending that I don't think about you constantly, that I don't look for excuses to spend time with you, that I don't feel something shift inside me every time you walk into a room. His forehead rested against hers. You saved my life's work, Chioma. But more than that, you made me remember what it feels like to connect with someone who truly sees me. I see you, she confirmed softly. The brilliant scientist, yes, but also the man who works 16-hour days because he's trying to save people like his mother. The man who's lonelier than he admits. The man who's afraid to let anyone close because caring about people makes you vulnerable. His breath caught. How do you see all that? Because I recognize it, because I'm the same way. She covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm more firmly against her cheek. I've spent 3 years in Seoul keeping people at arm's length, focusing only on work, telling myself that professional success was enough. But it's not enough. You're not enough when you're alone. When he kissed her, it was with the intensity of someone who had been holding back for too long. And Chioma realized that all her careful boundaries had been an illusion from the moment she'd thrown herself into exposing that fraud, risking everything to protect him. As they broke apart, both breathing hard, Minho whispered, "You saved me from a mistake that would have destroyed me." Which mistake? Chioma asked, though her heart already knew. Believing that I should keep you at a professional distance, believing that what I feel for you is something I should fight. His arms tightened around her. You're not just my research partner, Chioma. You're mine, and I'm yours. And everything else, the complications, the risks, the reasons this should be impossible, none of it matters compared to that truth. As Chioma looked into his eyes, she realized her life had changed again as dramatically as it had the night she'd caught that dosage error. She had started as an unwanted temporary employee, become a senior researcher, and now found herself claimed by a man whose intensity matched her own, whose future was becoming inseparable from hers. 2 years later, Chioma stood in the Research Institute's main laboratory, watching through the observation window as Minho presented their latest breakthrough to a room full of international scientists. Their enzyme replacement therapy had just completed phase 2 clinical trials with remarkable success rates, and pharmaceutical companies around the world were competing for licensing rights. But more remarkable than their professional success was the life they had built together. Minho had been right. Their collaboration was extraordinary, each of them pushing the other to greater heights while maintaining the integrity that had brought them together. They had published groundbreaking research, secured major grants, and built a team of brilliant scientists who shared their values. And they had fallen deeper in love with each passing day. As Minho finished his presentation and his eyes found hers through the window, Chioma felt the same flutter in her chest that she'd felt that first night. He made his excuses to the crowd and came to find her, his hand immediately reaching for hers. "The licensing negotiations are going well," she said, leaning into him. "The European consortium increased their offer." "Because of your delivery system innovations," Minho replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You solved the degradation problem that's been plaguing enzyme therapies for decades." "We solved it," she corrected. "This was always a collaboration." He turned her to face him, his expression serious despite the triumph of the day. "Everything changed the night you caught that dosage error. I was so focused on expanding my research, on proving myself, that I'd stopped questioning the people around me. I'd stopped trusting my instincts. You reminded me what scientific integrity looks like." "You would have caught it eventually," Chioma said, but he shook his head. "No, I was blind because I wanted the partnership too much. You saw clearly because you cared more about the truth than about your own future. His hands framed her face with the same tenderness he'd shown that first night in her office. You didn't just save my research, Chioma. You saved me from becoming someone I didn't want to be. As he kissed her, Chioma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had started as someone whose integrity kept costing her opportunities, and she had become someone whose integrity created possibilities. The greatest possibility of all had been the man in her arms, brilliant and vulnerable, driven and tender, someone who had needed exactly what she had to offer. Their love story had begun with a fraudulent decimal point, with courage in crisis, with a moment of truth that had changed both their lives. But it had grown into something that transcended science, something that proved the most important discoveries weren't made in laboratories, but in the spaces between two hearts finding their perfect equation. And as Soul's lights glittered beyond the laboratory windows, Chioma knew she had finally found where she belonged. Not as someone who had to dim her brilliance to fit in, but as someone whose mind was celebrated, whose voice was valued, and whose love was cherished by a man who saw her completely and wouldn't have her any other way. But as Minho's phone buzzed with an urgent message, his expression changed to concern. He read the screen, then looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "What is it?" she asked. Robert Chen was released from prison today on a technicality. His jaw tightened. And according to my security team, he's already in Seoul. The unspoken question hung between them. After 2 years, was their past about to catch up with them? And what would Chen do now that he was free and looking for revenge against the people who had destroyed his schemes? Chioma felt a chill run down her spine, but when she looked at Minho, she saw not fear but determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else, with courage, integrity, and the unshakable certainty that some truths were worth protecting, no matter the cost.